Hey, welcome back. This is the Franchisors.com summer tour. We are on day number 33. And if you can't tell in the background, actually it stopped, but we are in the Big Apple. Very pleased to be joined by someone that I have a lot of respect for. John Teza, franchise industry veteran, Quiznos, Jersey Mike's. Man, what was after Jersey Mike's? It was...
Yeah, so I spent some time in Corner Bakery and then joined Aziz and Susan at NRD Capital 2 years ago this August.
Got it. Also, you sit on the board for the National Restaurant Association,
Indeed.
Correct? Yeah. Board of Trustees for the IFA, principal at NRD Capital.
Yeah.
So very pleased to have you here. I know most of the people in the audience, Franchisors.com, know you. You're also content chair at Springboard for a couple of years. Let's start off with having you share a little bit about that. The importance of Springboard for emerging brands, and then also just what has the experience been being the chair of that content?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Thanks to you and Zach. Before we get too far at it, how you guys holding up? 33 straight days on the road together, living in a bus. How's it going?
We're actually holding up very well. Other than the fact that Brad and Lane have us doing some really funny stuff with videos, and folks watching, you should check those out. They're coming out soon. We're doing some really neat stuff with a thing called Young Conference, which will be kind of announced.
That's the under 40 conference?
Well, we're not defining it as under 40, but we're holding up very well. We don't stay in RV parks, we stay in RV resorts, as we like to say. Yeah. But our team here, SJ, Andrew, Zach, and then Ben and John back at home, we work very well together. So we're holding up good.
Cool.
But share a little bit about the importance of Springboard.
Yeah, so Lane and Brad approached me a couple of years ago. I was at the original Springboard, have been involved with them in one way, shape, or form since the beginning.
Was that like 8 years ago? I'm not quite sure. Something like that.
Sure, yeah. But they approached me a couple of years ago and asked me to get involved from a planning standpoint with some of the content, which I was blown away. I mean, those two guys are, just industry icons, and what they've done not only with Springboard but in their respective careers. It was just an amazing honor to be involved, and they really allowed me to kind of take it and run with it. And so I've been involved now for a couple of years, and it's just been incredible to watch that conference continue to grow and continue to influence and impact so many young and emerging franchisors. Yeah,
and then also influence and impact. That's kind of a segue for a lot of folks and how they get introduced to the IFA. Mm-hmm. I've noticed from a membership perspective, but for the purposes of the topic, what we'll be discussing, these are kind of 11 general topics that you're probably familiar with, and from a content perspective, it's kind of distilled questions that go on in Springboard and throughout unconferences and all the rest. But first one starts with team. So would love to have you give some advice to emerging brands as to what that early team should look like, and kind of what some of the first hires should probably be.
It's a great question. It's something we talk a lot about at Springboard year in and year out. There's a session around how do you structure your team for growth. And I think what's absolutely true is that emerging franchisor management teams are going to be a direct reflection of the founders and the founders' strengths. Mm-hmm. And I think what I counsel any franchise founder to consider is, what are they great at? And how can they gain leverage around that? What are their blind spots? What are the areas that they either have zero interest or a diminished capacity to be effective at, and how do they gain leverage around those things, right? So I think first and foremost, a franchisor's job is to be a great trainer. And so if I could counsel franchise founders to bolster any part of their management team out of the gate, it's around training. It's to make sure that they've got really well-defined training protocols and people that are super passionate about the brand and super passionate about the day-to-day execution of the brand, and to make sure that they've investment spent in that area. beyond that, it really comes down to, what parts of the business do they feel like they need to add leverage, right? So if they're a great natural salesperson, if they sort of embody the principles and the values of the brand and they can speak articulately about it, they probably don't need to go hire somebody who's a franchise salesperson, right?
Yep.
That said, if the opposite is true and they're sort of a tactician and much more involved in the nuts and bolts of the day-to-day operations of the business, then perhaps that's an area that they need to bolster. So really, the first couple of hires are going to be a reflection of the management team. What I really counsel folks against is look beyond their immediate network. Too many times you see franchise executive teams that are a direct reflection of the founder in terms of who's around them,
Yep.
Whether it's family members or friends, or I think it's really critical that founders seek efficacy in their first hires. It's not their money that's entrusted, right? Their franchisees are the ones that are investing in the brand, and they have a responsibility to their franchisees to make sure that they build efficacy in their organization.
Yeah. So when you look at the role of the franchisor, the role of the franchisee, franchisors, you mentioned training.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, franchisors train, they support the franchisees, and they that's what they're buying into.
Yeah.
So one of the things, it's a little kind of off topic from the standard, but one of the things that's very important is to be capitalized the right way.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have as it relates to that? Because time and again, as we're on this tour, it's obvious, we know this already, but it's obvious that if you're beholden on those franchise fees to operate the business, then that can run into a dicey situation. But how are you looking at the need to be capitalized appropriately early on?
So from the franchisor's perspective?
Correct, franchisors.
Yeah, so we see this, right? In our work at NRD Capital, we talk to a lot of, we talk to franchisors sort of across the spectrum. And we often find that folks are in the emerging sector are sort of myopic, right? They're very nearsighted as it relates to what their capital needs are going to be.
Yeah.
And what I counsel people all the time, whether it's formally through the work that we do with our portfolio companies or informally as a part of the work that we do just in the industry, it's to have a really good long-range plan in place and to understand what the progression of your capital needs looks like, not just your capital needs at the moment, right? And because you need to make decisions about how you invest and spend in certain parts of the business. And you can't make those decisions without the framework of a really decent long-range plan that allows you to understand the trade-offs, right? If I make this investment in sales, if I make this investment in training, if I make this investment in IT, here's where it may pay off. And here are the short-term benefits and the short-term trade-offs and the long-term benefits and the long-term trade-offs. So, I think for founders in particular, or for young management teams, having that visibility into what their capital need roadmap is going to look like is an incredibly important first step.
Yeah. So a lot of the folks in the audience are also re-emerging brands as well.
Yeah.
Could you give a quick commercial on NRD if folks watching or listening aren't familiar with NRD?
Yeah.
Just a quick commercial.
So NRD Capital is a private equity fund that was started by Aziz Hashim in 2014. Susan Beth is our chief operating officer. Between Aziz and Susan, two incredible franchise backgrounds. The company invested in Frisch's Big Boy in 2015, and Fuzzy's Taco Shop in 2017.
From Texas.
Absolutely. Great brand. I'm sorry, 2016 was Fuzzy's. And then out of their second fund in 2017, became the majority owner of NRD Capital. In addition to our we also are the majority owner of an emerging brand ourselves, a Toronto-based restaurant concept called the Captain's Boil. And then last year we branched out into a non-restaurant franchise called Out2 Trampoline Park. It's our first non-restaurant franchise concept. In addition to that, we've also built a practice in technology, and particularly what we call operations technology. Technology that can be utilized at the four-wall level for operators with the specific intent to help them be more profitable.
Got it. Let's So what was the name of the Toronto-based company?
The Captain's Boil.
The
It's a great
Captain's Boil.
concept, yeah.
So let's use that as an example because
Sure.
I think it'll be a really cool exercise. Just got the idea, but when you're looking at the first group of franchisees that come into that brand,
Yeah.
and this is meant to be for any emerging brand,
Yeah.
but when you look at the first group of franchisees, how important is it to have the right folks, and what does the selection process look like? Speak to that.
Sure. So I think what's true at Captain's Boil is true in, my gosh, 99% of the brands that we've come across that either I've worked with or that we've been exposed to. The first set of franchisees are almost exclusively people that are super passionate about the brand from a consumer perspective. It's just the way that brands scale, particularly in restaurants, particularly in sort of retail-based businesses. It's the most passionate consumers that become the first franchisees, or the most passionate people in the founders' networks that become franchisees, and that's great because that sort of passion and focus on the consumer brand is really important at sort of getting getting forward progression. What is also universally true is that subset of franchisees is never universally skilled or universally adequate is the wrong word, but
they're not the seasoned operators, right? Yeah.
There's always some sort of operational deficiencies in that first group, right? Like, we know this. It's universally true that not everybody's meant to be a franchisee. Not all entrepreneurs are meant to be franchisees.
Yep.
Some very successful entrepreneurs have a very difficult time operating within the framework that is determined by a franchise concept. And not everybody is moved by the sort of entrepreneurial bug. So, and that's sort of universally true. You look at emerging franchisors, and everybody who's watching this, and sort of anybody who's been in the business understands that out of that first subset of franchisees, unfortunately, some folks are not going to do as well as others. And I think what's incumbent upon a franchisor that wants to move from emerging to sort of the next stage is that they spend some time understanding what works and what doesn't. And this is true for franchisee recruitment. It's true for real estate, for retail-based concepts. It's true for many parts of the business. Founders need to take a pause after that first wave and say, what is it that works? What is it that doesn't work? And how do we profile for that so that we recognize it coming downstream and we can avoid what doesn't work?
So as the profile changes over time, maybe you're taking that feedback and you're just learning with it, and the profile will change.
Yeah, I mean, look, it starts with creating the profile.
Sure.
Right. First and foremost, it starts with an intention, creating intention around these are the people that we want to recruit and welcome into the brand, and these are the people that we probably don't. And having that framework to start with is critically important. Of course, that framework is going to evolve, right, as the brand evolves. But starting with a framework is important. You can't evolve it unless you
Any other pitfalls in the early stages that you've seen?
Yeah, you talked about capitalization on the franchisor side, and the capitalization on the franchisee side is critically important.
Yeah.
And capitalization and capital requirements have a filtering effect, and I think a lot of early franchisors get caught up in the, can I get this guy across, or can I get this woman across the finish line? I really want to make them a franchisee. And what oftentimes gets lost in it is, do they have not only the minimum requirements, but do they have the financial dry powder to get that business to break even, right? We all like to think that our businesses break even immediately. The reality is that many don't, and many require not just an upfront capital investment, but a working capital investment over a period of time. And if you've not underwritten for that working capital investment, you've put your franchisee in a really tough spot. Yeah. So understanding the sort of intrinsic and extrinsic aspects of the profile is one really important part. The second is making sure that you've got a capitalization requirement that allows them to get to profitability.
And it's also opportunity costs missed if you're spending time and energy on folks who can't get to profitability and break even. And if you can get there quicker, then they'll probably open more units.
Yeah.
And so next topic is related to differentiating the franchise offer. Let's talk about it from a franchise offering perspective and then also maybe a consumer offering perspective. Do you have any general advice on how to stand out maybe in a crowded market and differentiating the value proposition and the franchise offering to prospective franchisees?
Yeah,
first?
so Brian, it's a great question, right? And I think we all become enamored with our business models, right? We all become enamored with our consumer offerings. And I think understanding how to differentiate yourself in the consumer marketplace is really important. The brand that comes to mind for me in thinking about that is Jimmy John's, right? Mm-hmm. So I spent a lot of years in the sub sandwich business, and when Jimmy John's began to really scale, it dawned on me that they created a point of differentiation that had really never been validated in the marketplace. Yeah. It had never been utilized and leveraged in the marketplace. They created speed as a measure of quality. And look, Jimmy John's product's a fine product, right? Forgetting about the differentiating on quality, because everybody thinks their product is great. They created speed as a measure of quality, and immediately differentiated themselves from everybody else in the business. That's brilliant, right? And so whatever your speed is, in Jimmy John's case, it was speed, and Jersey Mike's case, it's the impact that they have on the community, right? Whatever your unique proposition is, it needs to be ingrained into the culture of the organization, and it needs to be something that you champion. Does it rise to the level of marketing and advertising, as it does in those two brands? I don't know. But at least internally, you need to be able to really champion that point of differentiation. Because the other thing is, it will, if done right, it becomes a filtering component for you in your franchise development. Because there are going to be, Jersey Mike's is a great example of that, right? If you're not altruistic, right, that organization does so much to help local communities. They do so much to give back in their local communities. And if you're not altruistic in nature, if you bristle at that, you're probably going to be a bad fit within that organization. Yeah. Because you're asked to really do a lot to benefit your local community. So it becomes a filtering effect. The more clearly defined your point of differentiation in the consumer space is, the more you can use it as a point of differentiation in your franchise base.
Yeah, I'm glad we talked about it from that frame, because I kind of asked two separate questions in one, but you're exactly right. It's timely because we were actually at Jersey Mike's headquarters yesterday, and we sat with their chief operating officer, who's been there since the beginning. And interesting note there, 80% of their franchise growth is existing operators, because they have this kind of culture within, and then also in their community investment and this and that. It's not contractually obligated for the franchisees to participate, but they have 100% participation in their they pick, I think it's the last Wednesday of every March or something, and 100% of sale. Yeah, it's wild. So there's definitely a link there. So that's very good advice.
They do a really good job screening for that.
Yeah.
Right. The reason they have 100% participation is that they're culturally aligned around that. Right. It's part of their values, but it's also because they have the ability to really screen out anybody who doesn't feel that way about helping their community.
Another thing that impressed me for the audience, I forget that we're filming. We just look at each other, but and we're just giving an example of how that all ties in from the screening and the first group of franchisees and on. They rolled out a program recently to go get some sort of organic certification. They needed all the franchisees had to change the way that they wash things and do all this stuff. Yeah. And they've been very successful at doing that. And it's because of how they bred. But next topic, unit economics. Speak about the importance of having the focus on unit economics, how to track, measure, and share if there's any kind of tools or tips that you have on it. So A, the importance, and B, how to at the end of the day harness it and boost unit economics.
Yeah, so I mean, it's critically important. It's everything, right? You talk about point of differentiation around the consumer and your franchise offering. Well, I mean, the strongest point of differentiation around your franchise offering is how are your unit economics, how profitable are your units, and thus how successful your franchisees and how likely are they to continue to operate.
Yep.
had an opportunity to go, when I went to work for Aziz, I went to work for somebody who champions unit economics probably more than anybody in the entire industry. When you work for somebody who is a massive franchisee, that kind of comes with the territory. So, I mean, it's certainly one of the most important things that we look at from a private equity standpoint. And from a franchisor's perspective, I think it's job number one, right? Along with making sure that your franchisees are trained well and that they have the right mechanisms to then go train their employees. I think it's critically important that the franchisor focuses a significant amount of their resources on making sure that franchisees are profitable. That means continuing to look at the underlying business model and ways to make it more profitable, whether that's through in the restaurant business, menu composition, or purchasing leverage, or just other efficiencies, or whether that's in a service franchise where it means extended offerings or adjunct offerings. I think franchisor's job is to make sure that they are continually putting out, presenting the most profitable model they can for their franchisees, and then having really good feedback mechanisms for their franchisees to know how they're performing against that model. I think of Sam Ballas, East Coast Wings, and that. I mean, Sam is
he put on a clinical when we met.
Look, Sam is he's unabashed about what is most important to him, and it clearly resonates in that organization. You talk about values and culture. That is you can't work in East Coast Wings and now get fried, I imagine. Unless you have a passion for driving franchisee profitability, unless it's just embedded in you.
Literally in our discussion, it's ingrained in my head: A plus B plus C plus or equals D or plus D.
But what's interesting about Sam doesn't just stand up and beat his chest about how important franchisee unit economics are. Sam has structured feedback mechanisms in place so that the entire organization knows who's profitable, who's not, who's moving in the right direction, who's more profitable this year than they were last year, who's less profitable this year than they were last year. The franchisees know it, his support team knows it, his executive team knows it. It's because he designed a system around really good feedback mechanisms around profitability. That's where the rubber meets the road.
Yep, absolutely. And for the folks watching, you can go find that episode. It's there on the website, Sam Ballas. Moving into the next topic, you already touched on from a franchise lead perspective, franchise leads, franchise sales. Early on, you talked about finding the consumer champions. As it evolves, any tips on how to put the pedal to the metal and really grow franchise sales after that kind of initial first batch?
Yeah, look, I think that the topic du jour, it's been the topic du jour for 20 years, is how do you drive more leads, right? How do you find more leads? And I think, within our brands and certainly within my time at Jersey Mike's, we approached it a little bit from a different angle. It's not about necessarily finding more leads. It's about finding more people that are aligned with our why. And to me, that's when you can really clearly define what your why is, and you can really clearly define the characteristics of who you want your franchisee to be. At that point, it's networking, right? It's really how do you go sort of aggressively target the people that fit that profile, and ask them to join your brand, welcome them into your brand. I've never been a big believer, probably because I had some experience some significant experience in it being a numbers game. And, I think that sort of has informed my opinion.
As a former chief development officer, I think you did have some significant experience.
But to me, it's not a numbers game, right? Yeah. This is really more about, I heard somebody just yesterday, as a matter of fact, somebody who was on your program not too long ago, likened the relationship to a marriage. And, whether, I've heard that comparison, I've heard the business partner comparison. But the reality is that it is not a transaction, right? If a franchise, and this is probably not super popular with a lot of my cohorts that have run development organizations, but I see it a whole lot less like a transaction and a whole lot more like a partnership, right? And so How do you drive more leads? Look, there's a million people that can tell you how you drive more leads. For me, it's how do you find more connections between the company's why and the sort of underlying makeup of the people you want to attract.
I love that frame, man. Another funny joke, whenever you're looking at prospective franchisees to accept into your system, someone on the trip joked, I think it was Don Fox with Firehouse Subs. He said, yeah, would you want to get on a bus with them and go across country?
Yeah, exactly right. So do you and Zach want to be partners?
It's funny. We actually are, and we don't want to punch each other. It's good. Next topic, franchisee relationships.
Yeah.
Obviously important to foster and cultivate. Any secrets on how to maintain great franchisee relations?
Well, look, I don't think there's any secret, and I certainly wouldn't lay claim to any, special way to do it. I've been involved with brands that have great relationships with their franchisees, and I've been involved with brands that had trouble relationships with their franchisees. Again, I think it starts with the underlying business model and our franchisees. Do franchisees feel like they have the opportunity to achieve their goals through your brand, right? Because that's why they do it, right?
Yep.
Nobody wakes up and says, I want to work really hard for the franchisor, right? Franchisees, at the end of the day, are trying to achieve their goals, their life goals, their business goals, through the execution of your brand.
Yep.
And so if they feel like they have the ability to do that and they can win, that's the foundation for a really good relationship. And if they feel like they can't, and worse yet, if they feel like you're the impediment, then it's going to be difficult to have good franchisee relations. So I think it starts with the underlying business model. I think from there, it really goes to how welcoming are you as a franchisor to feedback and to counsel as to how you can make the system better. I will tell you, without question, the three words I dislike the most from a franchisor's perspective is protect the brand. And I think it's so, when I hear a franchisor's representative say, well, we have to protect the brand, it makes my skin crawl, because at the end, you're talking about somebody on the other end of the dialogue that has invested significant capital and significant time into the brand. They are as much of the brand as the franchisor is. And so who are you protecting it from? Right. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to run, it's going to be sort of unfettered ability to tinker and change things. But as a franchisor, you've got to be open to feedback from your franchisees about how to make the brand better, how to evolve the brand. They're as close to the consumer, unless you own company stores, they're far closer to the consumer than you are. And so I think having a good open dialogue, whether that's formal with things like franchise councils or informal, I think it's just critically important that you have really good open dialogue with your franchisees.
Yeah. Love the perspective again, man. A couple of last things. It's a little fluffy to talk about culture. And I know we do it often, but from a culture perspective, could you speak to what the right corporate culture looks like for an emerging brand?
So that's such a good question, Ryan. I appreciate you asking it. The reality, just one man's opinion, right? And having been in
one man's opinion with people in the background.
Having been in several organizations, culture is not something that you build or define. Culture is something that reveals itself over time, and there is no right or wrong culture for an emerging brand. I think, much like what we talked about earlier, where if there's an evolution of who you attract from a franchisee's perspective, your culture is going to evolve over time as your system scales, and as you get a more sort of diverse composition of people that are invested in it, right? Everything from management team to founders to shareholders to the employees at the company level to your franchisees' employees, right? They all have an impact on the composition of the organization, and they all bring something a little bit different to the culture. And so that's why I think culture evolves. I think what's important is that whatever your point of differentiation is from a consumer standpoint or from a franchisee's perspective, to the extent that your culture, your values, and the behaviors that are representative of those values, to the extent that they impact those things, that stays consistent, right? And so a good example is Fuzzy's Taco Shop, which is a brand that we're invested in, that we love. Mel Knight is our our founder there.
Fort Worth, Texas.
Yeah, such an incredible guy. And, you know, he has maintained, since we've been involved with the brand, that they need to make sure that they continue to maintain a culture, their culture, right? Which is, you know, we're gonna be a little off center. We're gonna allow things to evolve a little bit. We're not so caught up in what we think is right that we're not gonna allow franchisees to bring things to bear that can have a really significant impact on the brand. And I mean, it's one of the most important things in Mel's life, and he's done a phenomenal job. And even though that brand has gotten bigger, it's doubled in size, even though that brand has, you know, they've welcomed big operators into the system. At one point, they were mostly a single unit system. He's been able to maintain that culture. And I think that's his differentiator. That's why people are attracted to that brand. And so for him, or for us as a private equity firm to come in and you know, change that, would have been a difficult thing.
Do you want to know something interesting? Because I'm a customer. I remember my first time going into the Fuzzy's Taco Shop in Fort Worth, the first one by TCU, and then I went to UT Arlington, and there's one there. We used to go drink the big Fuzzeritas. Yeah. But all over the walls are the people, and so they've ingrained that both on the consumer side, and then you know people have a voice there. So it's very interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting. As we move to close, want to ask you if I'm a re-emerging brand or an emerging brand, maybe looking for the right partner for capital, and I'm trying to evaluate what my roadmap needs to look like. Maybe I don't need to do it today. Any general advice, as that's obviously now your main focus and area of expertise with NRD, but any advice to folks looking at their capital structure and thinking they might need to take on some growth funding?
So again, great question, Ryan. I think understanding what the long view is, and you know, not necessarily planning for next year's growth, but how do I put enough capital? How do I bring enough capital in so that I can continue to grow this brand, and I'm not going out and raising capital again, you know, 24 months from now. So it goes back to that long range planning discussion that we had earlier. I think understanding who you are as a company and how that relates to the right capital partner for you. Like, you know, the Fuzzy's example is a perfect example. I think given what Aziz and Susan set out, and Harrison Price and the original founders of NRD Capital set out to do, they were really the right capital partner for Fuzzy's. There were probably some capital partners that would not have been, right? And you know, that would have been a difficult row for Mel. So as a founder, I think you have to understand what are the things that are important to you in terms of how you want to relate to your new financial partner, and doing some of that soul searching up front before going to market. I think that's really important.
Because that's also a marriage as well.
Yeah, 100%.
100%. Any parting words of advice to emerging folks out there? A quick little graduation punch of advice as we move to part here.
So I'll come back to something we talked about earlier about Springboard, and what I failed to mention earlier, and I want to make sure that I spend some time on now, is that it's a very unique conference in that they are really, the peer-to-peer sharing at Springboard is unlike anywhere else. And I think more often than not, emerging franchisors sit in rooms and they hear from, you know, incredibly talented executives that are running organizations that are 10 or 100 times as large, or founders that were super successful over a 30-year career. And what's often lost on the very well-intentioned speakers is that emerging franchisors are like just trying to keep everything together, right? And so at Springboard, you have the ability to interact with peers that are in that same, either in that same stage or maybe just sort of graduated from that stage, but they understand that, like, you have choices to make, right? Yeah. Okay, I understand these are the best practices across every aspect of the business.
I'm not the only one that's messed up.
Right, and you have to prioritize, right? And if I've got 10 things to fix in the next 12 calendar months, I'm going to be able to fix 2. Yeah. Like, tell me how to prioritize. I know that I got to fix them all, and I know, and thank you very much for telling me how. But I only have the time and the human resources to approach 2 of them. Right? Yeah. So how do I prioritize? Those are the kinds of conversations that happen at Springboard. And because of the informal nature of it, but also because of the who chooses to attend. So if you're an emerging franchisor, or if you're a recently post-emergent franchisor, whatever that means, I think it's continue to participate in Springboard, because I think it's a really important conference for the industry.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the time. Another thumbnail there. I think there's 300 franchisors being represented this year, which is quite incredible. But John, thank you very much for the time.
Ryan, thanks so much for having me.
Cheers.
Yeah.